Good morning. Over the last few days, I've posted several times with some numbers, with some data, looking at the risks data, looking at the probability that individuals in certain age groups, what are their chances of dying of COVID-19? And what I've done, I've used the week 16 data from the Office of National Statistics website. So week 16, as of today, Sunday, the 3rd of May, it's the most recent, the most up-to-date weekly profile of death information that's been published here in the UK, and it's based on data up to and including the 17th of April. Tuesday coming, so in 2 days' time, we'll have the next week's worth. So I'll have the data up to the 24th of April, but at the moment I've got to work to the data for that week that ends the 17th of April. And in that data, it tells us how many people died in total, how many people died with COVID-19 on their death registration certificate, and it compares it to other weeks in the year to date. And what I've done, I've used that particular week's data to come to some estimates of, if you're a certain age, what's the probability that you, well, specifically that you would have died of COVID-19 in week 16. The reason week 16 is a very interesting week for data is because it's the first week where there's probably a significant redress to the problem that's been identified, that in care homes there are probably a lot of deaths associated with COVID-19, but they weren't registered as COVID-19 deaths. They were registered as deaths, but they probably weren't registered as COVID-19 deaths. And week 16 is probably the first week that begins to address that. So let me explain how I've arrived at my estimates. I'm going to use an analogy to start with. It's quite a subtle statistical concept, and so this video should be quite a nice little video explaining that statistical concept. And the analogy I'm going to use is of a policeman and a speed traffic cop who's been out with his speed gun, and let's say he has issued, because of his speed gun, he's issued 100 speeding tickets. And we just happen to know, because of the way he's recorded information, that of those 100 speeding tickets, 20 of the cars, 20 of the drivers were in red cars. So of the 100, 20 were red. So we've got a statistic, and I can express that statistic in a number of ways. Essentially, we're saying 20 out of the 100, or 20% of those issued speeding tickets, were for red cars. 20 out of 100, 0.2, 20%, all different ways of saying the same thing. 20 out of the 100 cars were, or the cars that were caught speeding, were red cars. Now, let's put that as a full sentence. The probability that your car was red, given that you received a speeding ticket, equals 20%, or 0.2, or 20 out of 100. So that's just putting in a specific sentence what I said a moment ago. In statistics, we like to use shorthand for statements like the one just there, because they become quite cumbersome. If you're doing a lot of statistical analysis and you have to include lots of sentences like that all the time, it gets very cumbersome. So we use a notation, a shorthand for expressing probabilities. And let me give you some examples. So the symbols here, this P and then brackets red car, if I made that a full sentence, what that thing represents is the full sentence. What is the probability that your car is red? And what I mean by that is, if we looked at all the cars, let's say here in the UK, I don't know how many there are, let's say there's 30 million cars. If we looked at how many of those are red, let's say 5 million are red, 5 million of that 30 million are red, so your probability is 5 out of 30. So that's what that P in brackets red car means. Equally, probability of ticket, if I'm going to use that shorthand, is the probability that you would get a speeding ticket. So our police cop here, let's assume he was the only police cop out on this day. Again, if there were, I don't know, let's say there were 20 million cars out on the roads that day and 100 speed tickets were issued, we can get a handle on what's the probability that you got caught speeding on that day. Now then, the full sentence I've got here, I'll move my cursor, the full sentence I've got here is a little bit more tricky. I'm going to still, though, try and create a shorthand to express it. So I've got some bigger brackets in anticipation of that. And starting with the first thing, so the probability that if you got a ticket, what is the probability that your car was red? So notice I said that we started with the idea, if you got a ticket on this day, or resulting from this day's activity of the policeman, what is the probability that your car was red? And so this is the shorthand I use. Notice this vertical bar structure. And essentially what this vertical bar structure is indicating is that when I've got two events or two probabilities somehow stacked together, I'll read the one to the right of the bar first, and then the one to the left of the bar. So let me say the sentence again. So given that you received a speeding ticket on that day, what is the probability that your car was read? And notice how I said that. I said, given that you had a ticket, that's the first one, what is the probability that your car was read? And so that's a shorthand notation that we use for sentences like this long sentence here. And because of the way I've done that, I can say they're equivalent and give it a value in this case of 0.2, 20 out of 100, 20% from the data we've got. Okay, so we've created or I've explained to you now the shorthand that we use. The problem with the question, as I've expressed it here, it's not quite in the form that most people would want to ask the question. Imagine that you are the owner of a red car. What you want to know is what's the probability you're going to get a speeding ticket? So that's the longhand version of the question. If I own a red car, what is the probability I will get a speeding ticket? Let me express that question in my shorthand. So there's my big bracket ready for combining these two things. Well, the first question I'm going to ask, and indeed I've answered, is what's the colour of your car? And therefore, what is the probability that your car is red? That's the first question I've answered. And then, having been given that bit of information, the second question I'm going to ask is, what's the probability I'm going to get a speeding ticket? So sticking to remember how I constructed this shorthand, that's the first question I ask to the right of the bar. And then the second question I ask is the one to the left of the bar. So this question is, given that I've got a red car, implied or implicitly means I've been asked the question, what's the color of my car? The answer's red. That's the first question I've answered. What then, going the other side of the bar, is the probability that I will get a speeding ticket? And notice that that question and the one we had before look very similar, but they're the other way around. So that's the first one here, probability, if you've got a ticket, what's the probability your car was red? The one here is given you've got a red car, what's the probability you had a speeding ticket? Now, those two things are related, but they're not simply related. And it's something that we use Bayes' theorem. Bayes was the statistician that first formalized this, and it's going to look quite intimidating when I put it up here. This is the statement of Bayes' theorem. But the thing you need to take home from here, can you see in this formula, I've got where my cursor is here, I've got it expressed one way around, or I'm asking what is it expressed this way around, on the assumption that I know the answer to it expressed the other way around. So if I know P A of B, I can work out the probability of B given A as long as I know these other quantities. So you can see this is a way that if you know it one way around, let's say this is the way around, it's the way my cursor's gone here at the top, the probability, given you've got a ticket, what's the probability that your car is red? Given that's the way you know, there is a way of accessing it the other way around. And let's specifically look at this for the car example. And again, it's going to look quite cumbersome, but that's the one I want to know. And this side of the equation is the one I do know. So I want to know P of ticket given red car. I know, though, the probability of red car given ticket. As long as I know the probability of ticket and the probability of red car. So what this means is what's the probability of all cars out there that get speeding tickets, and what proportion of all cars out there are red cars. Okay, so using Bayes' formula, we can interchange information. This is the information the police officer from his day's worth of activity with his speed gun. This is the form of the question that's actually probably of more use to most people. If you've got a red car, what's the chance I'm going to get a speeding ticket? And that's quite important perspective, because let's now look at the COVID data. Now, in the COVID-19 data on the Office of National Statistics website, I've made up these numbers, so don't try and look these numbers up. These are just examples. But we've got spreadsheets that for each age group, and it's divided into 5-year intervals, we've got the number of COVID deaths. And as I said at the start of this, I'm looking at week 16 data. So we've got the number of deaths, COVID deaths, in each of the age groups in week 16. If I now use my shorthand, let me be quite clear what we're saying. The first question I've asked is, did you die of COVID? And the answer is, if you did, yes. What age were you? So bearing in mind how I use this shorthand, the question to the right of the bar is the question you ask first. Then, assuming that's true in this case, was it a COVID death? You then ask the question to the left of the bar, what age were you? And just to be really quite clear and use a notation that I often use for age groups, I can express it like this. So again, where my cursor is here and where this red box is around the data, that red data is telling me, okay, if it was a COVID death, did you die of COVID? Was it a COVID death? If it was, the next question I'm going to ask is, what age were you? And specifically, were you in the 50 to 54 years of age bracket? Of course, these are numbers rather than ratios, but on a spreadsheet, you just add them up and divide them by the total, and that gives you your ratio. But again, you can see I've got using my standard notation. I've asked one question first, was it a COVID death? And then if it was, what was the age of the person? Or what's the probability the person was in a certain age bracket? But the question people want to know is, if I'm in the, and where my cursor is at the bottom here, if I'm in the 50 to 54 year age bracket, the question I'm going to ask first and answer, yes, I'm in the 50 to 54 age bracket, what is my probability of dying of COVID? And can you see we're exactly back in the Bayes situation? We've got two things that look very similar and as questions sound very similar, but one is the other way around to the other. That's the one I know, the one with the red dots around it, but the one I want to know is that one. So it means I've got to get Bayes' theorem out and I've got to convert it, but I can convert it. That's the key thing. But if we look at the right-hand side of this equation, this is the one we know. I'm circling it now. That's the one that comes from this chart from the spreadsheet I've got. I've got to know two other things. I've got to know what's the probability of COVID death and what's the probability of being 50 to 54. Well, what I mean by probability of COVID death, I've got to look at the whole population of the UK, 66 point whatever million it is, work out the number, well, not work out, it tells me in the spreadsheet the total number of people that died in week 16. So I know the probability of someone dying of COVID in week 16 as a proportion of the whole population, as long as I know the whole population statistics. Equally, I need to know probability 50 to 54 is a statement of what's the probability of somebody being in that age bracket. I need total population statistics for the UK. That's stratified by the same age, and then I can work out the proportion of the population in each of the age groups. The latest data I've got for that is 2018 data. The data for 2019 would normally be issued about now in 2020, sort of a few months after the year has ended. But of course, I imagine the ONS are up to their eyes in other things to do with COVID, so they haven't yet issued that. So the latest one I have is the 2018 data. But looking at the 2018 data, I can get an estimate of probability of being in the 50 to 54, or indeed any of the age brackets. And then looking at total population numbers in the spreadsheet I've got from the ONS for the COVID deaths, I can work out that. And by analysing individual rows of the spreadsheet, I can get that. The combination gives me an insight into answering that question. I've answered a number of similar questions in the analysis as well, but they're all very much based on the spreadsheet gives me the data one way round. I use Bayes' theorem to switch the question to make it more relevant to the question that people want to know. So there we go. That's just my little brief, I suppose, a brief introduction to Bayesian statistics. In a sense, it's elegant. In a sense, it's simple, but it also can be quite complex in its detail as well. But hopefully that's just given you a little bit of insight into how I produce the tables and the charts that I've posted on Facebook and in my blog over the last couple of days. Thank you for watching.